All right, from the studio of Fairfax City, we are very grateful that Rafael Anton Irisarri accepted our invitation to our show. Rafael, welcome to my humble podcast, man.
Hey, Claudio. Thanks for having me.
Hey, no problem. Let's go back to the beginning of your life. Were you born like in a musical family? I mean, at all? What memory do you have when you were, I don't know, 5, 6 year old? Your parents playing music at home, or your brother playing the guitar, or anything like that?
My grandfather did. Like he played the accordion, and I think the earliest memory that I have is listening to him playing folk songs on the accordion. But other than that, like I didn't come from a family that had anything to do with the arts or music or anything like that. So
Yeah,
I come from a pretty working class, poor working class background. So music, like making music, wasn't something that like people did. They were too busy,
yeah,
like um, trying to put food on the table to do
sure.
art or whatever. So I'm kind of like, um, I guess, quote unquote, the black sheep of the family because like. I chose to do art, which is, in hindsight, it sounds like a really terrible idea, but that's what I love to do. So yeah, that's my earliest memory of hearing music or seeing music perform, for that matter.
What about in high school? Were you in any bands at all?
No, like I was very much into music. By then, like I was super into music. And I play some instruments, like I play guitar, bass, and I kind of just bounce around quite a lot. So I wasn't really in a place where I was like, oh, I'm part of something or whatnot. I guess I was trying to feel like I was part of something in a way, and just bounce around a lot. And um, so my earliest experiences, like trying to um, make music, was pretty much on my own in a way, because I was like making electronic music by that point. And with electronic music, well, you're kind of doing everything yourself in a way. Like you're not really, like playing with other people. You're, working with drum machines or synthesizers or things that you can program and, you know, play. And you're pretty much, at that point, you're just working solo most of the time.
And so, before you finished high school, you were you knew back then that you wanted to get involved in music
Oh
or
no,
college
no,
or
absolutely not. Like, there's no like music wasn't really something that like seemed like feasible thing to do, for many reasons.
yeah,
And it took me a really long time to kind of find my own way of doing it, and just doing my own thing and being able to create something that resonated with any audience whatsoever. Like I was in, like, when I was younger, I had like regular jobs. I didn't go to college. I kind of like just bounced around quite a bit, and I was involved in complete different things that have nothing to do with music.
gotcha,
and
yeah,
and eventually I found my way into music. But it was a very it was a very long kind of process. Like it wasn't something like, I woke up one day and I said, oh yeah, I want to be like a musician and I want to be an artist or anything like that. It's a very long
right, your process, right?
very long process. Like I remember early on when I lived in Seattle, like, putting shows together for other artists, like actual
Gotcha.
artists, and like be like, oh yeah, I'm putting a show and I'm doing this and I'm doing that and I'm curating things and I'm trying to make things happen. But it wasn't. It was all very organic. There was no real grand plan or anything of the sort. It was a bit like, it just you kind of fell into it, and um, yeah, and that's how it kind of built in a way.
Good for you, man. But you were going, right. You were buying some vinyls, going
Oh,
to
for sure. Yeah,
concerts,
absolutely.
so
Yeah,
music was
absolutely.
in the background, right? You didn't know which.
Yeah, I mean, I was it was more than in the background. I was pretty obsessed with music
I get you. Yeah, yeah.
all around, and I collected a lot of records, and I was very much into music. This is not something that like I thought like you could you could actually do and like like earn a living from it. Like I mean, nowadays it's a bit in hindsight it's like crazy, right? But yeah, it was just not something that could be like you could make a career out of it or anything like that. It was just that was never my plan at all. Like it was more like
Yeah.
it's just kind of happened organically, I guess.
And then at the time you began, I suppose, learning how to play guitar or bass,
Yeah,
try
I'm
the
like completely
bands, that kind of stuff,
self-taught.
right?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I'm completely self-taught, and I mostly I learned how to play like listening to records and like just listening to things that I like at the time. Since I was younger, I've been playing guitar for probably like 35 years at this point, and
Wow.
I was never really like a great player. Actually, like I wasn't like, like all the players that I thought, oh my god, this guy is incredible or whatnot. I can never do that. I was more like I just found my own way with the instrument and like I learned a lot of songs, obviously, like from different artists that I like at the time, and I learned how to play them, like listen to the record, try to like learn the parts and whatnot. Like back in the day, like we didn't have I guess access to everything, right? Like you can like nowadays, if you want to learn, I don't know, whatever song by whatever band, you can pretty much Google it or something, and you'll find like a transcription somewhere. Like a lot of times they're horribly wrong because it's all made by other people, right? And a lot of times you get like you're like, oh, that's not the right chord of this song at all. Like it's ridiculous, right? But you can get a little approximation of it. But when I was like a teenager, there was not such thing because I'm nearly 50, so in the early 90s you couldn't just Google for like, oh, I want to learn X song by I don't know, like
Peter Gabriel or whatever.
yeah, whatever band. You couldn't just Google for it, and you had to listen to the record and then try to figure it out. And a lot of times I feel that may have contributed a lot to the way that I played music in general, because there wasn't really like a correct way of doing anything. I just kind of find my
Hmm.
own way of doing it. So maybe like I was playing, I don't know, maybe a song by The Cure, and perhaps I was playing it in the most difficult way possible. Perhaps it was probably an easier way to play it when I was
Yeah.
playing. But I didn't know any better, so I didn't really have anyone teaching me like, oh, if you tune the guitar this way, then you can do that chord inversion like only using three strings or open string or whatever. But I didn't know that at the time, so I had to like kind of find my own way of doing it. And yeah, I think in many ways, while it may have made the process a lot more difficult in terms of like the time it takes to learn something and do things, it also helped me be in this mindset of finding my own way of doing things and not like being told how to do something or oh, this is the correct way to do X or Y or Z. And like it really puts you in a mindset where the most important thing that you need to have is just curiosity and like wanting to know how this is done or why this is done or why this is done in this way or whatever, and kind of why was that done in this way or whatever. Same with like music production or I don't know, whatever it may be. Like it really puts you in that mindset of like, oh, I want to really figure this out. I want to know more about this. How do I figure this one out when I don't have a lot of good access to information, immediate access to information? But it really plants that seed to develop a very curious mind.
Yeah. I think your approach is very, very good. Because I
Oh, thank
think
you.
that helped you out to do well in life. Now when you record in the studio and work with other artists and help it artists and take it their career to the next level, that way of doing things, right? Like you did it everything on your own. That is very, very helpful. I think, curiosity, like many scientists will say, is more important than maybe intelligence or having a good teacher, I suppose, right? If you
In a way,
have the
yeah.
tenacity, the motivation, the will to put, two and two together, I think that pay off in whatever you do in life.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I reckon like in this quote unquote industry of music,
Yeah.
it's an incredibly competitive field. So there is, we can go into that's a long conversation, right? But
Yeah.
I think having tenacity to me is incredibly important to keep up doing what you're doing when all the odds are against you. Like to me, that's what really separates some artists from others. The fact that they can keep going, and I think like for every failure, for every door that closes, like every time the door gets slammed in your face, like then you learn something new and you try to find a way around the door. Maybe you can climb out a window or something, and like maybe you can, maybe you end up kicking the door in or bulldozing it or whatever. But like, the point is that, it kind of teaches you a lot to like develop and in a way that it's completely, I guess, unorthodox because like in America, particularly, you're taught that you're supposed to do certain things by the time you're a certain age,
Right.
and you're kind of this is kind of ingrained in your psyche in a way. So by X time you must have finished high school. By X time you must have finished college. By X time you must have a career. By this time you must be married. By this time you must have kids. By this time, and it's all these things that are, well, absolutely meaningless because everyone has their own path in life. There's no right or wrong way to do anything. It's just about the way that works for you, really.
Absolutely. Now, if I your curiosity, you are not a Gemini, right? Were you born
I
like
am
in
not.
June?
I am Aries through and through.
Ah, I got it, because
Yeah.
we are very, I'm a Gemini. We are very similar to what you say, to when I begin, when I opened the channel, many people told me, well, nobody will give you time of the day, or you will never be able to get a hold of them, or because yeah, it's true that you know music, but you have an accent of this or that. And the more that people say that, the more motivation to
Yeah, absolutely.
I need to do things. Now, 800 videos, 100 something thousand subscribers, and I'm going after all the big names. So it's hard
That's how
work
it
and
works.
dedication. That's the way it works, man.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And I
hard
think
work and
that's,
dedication is all about, man.
yeah, I think applying oneself and having absolute dedication to one's craft and not listening to the naysayers, not listening to
Sure. Yeah.
it really pays off if you stick around and you keep up with it and you don't get like sidetracked, because it's very easy to get sidetracked, and it's very easy to, I think, like giving up is the easiest thing in life. Like just giving up is so easy, right? Like it's such a
Sure.
it's like yeah, it's just too easy, right? To like be like, oh no, that didn't work out. Like I guess that I tried and that was that. And
I know it. Yeah, I know
yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
I know exactly what you mean, man. In
yeah,
general, your music, has been kind of labeled or defined as an alchemy of ambient, classic, and experimental element, introspection, nostalgia, emotional interplay between plate sound and silence. So why that type of music? Why you didn't become like a rock and roll guy, or why electronic, kind of electronic music and in general?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. That yeah, like I think for me, like the way that like I make music, it's pretty much like an extension of my own personality. Like
Mm.
I can't separate the two. Like I think like with the kind of music that I make, it's something like if I think of it really hard, it's like having like an extra arm or a leg or something like that. It's like a part of you in a way. And I think the way that I make it and the way that I do it is infinitely linked to my ability as a proper musician. So because I didn't learn how to play instruments like properly, or like I wasn't taught at a conservatory or like at a music school or anything of the sort, I kind of developed my own way of writing and of playing and ultimately of making music. And I think a lot of the music that I've done for a very long time has been a result of the process itself more than actually trying to be X, Y, or Z. So for example, when when I was living in Seattle, I did my first album for Ghostly International, the record label, as the site below. I was very much into techno at a time, and I was going to a lot of clubs and putting on techno shows and promoting them and doing this and doing that. And I was very much immersed in that electronic dance music culture. And I think when I was trying to make techno sounding tracks, things that I enjoyed or things that will hear at club or something, I will try to start making a track, and then like I felt I can't get it to sound like that. Like it's just not like I don't know all the ins and out of it. But I can take this drum machine and I can program a kick drum and I can program some basic rhythm and I can play guitar along to it. And it's really fun, and I'm having a good time doing this and like kind of generating some sound using like the guitar as like a sound source in a way, like the same way that you will use um like a modular synthesizer or something like that. And if I take that guitar sound and like put it through um some delay units and I start looping things, I can start doing something that uh, reminds me of some like 1970s like um, German school of music, like Manuel Gottschalk or something. And but I'm not a great musician like Manuel Gottschalk was, so of course what I'm making it's never gonna be like as like prominent like or as prodigious as that kind of thing. So I'm working with what I have and trying to express more of an emotion of what I'm feeling at the time through the instrument, and not really paying so much attention to like whether oh I wish I could play more notes or I wish I could do this or that. I'm just kind of feeling what's going on around me and then transcribing that into what I'm playing and whatnot. And at a time when I was making this record, like I was going through some rough patches in my own life, and I think that all was poured into it. And the sound of that record is very much the process of making it. Whether like I didn't bother to like multi-track anything. Like everything is played live, and basically like I took a little mixer and like ran the stereo out of the mixer straight into a sound card, like into the left or right of the sound card. I didn't multi-track anything or
Hmm.
whatever. And it was just one take kind of thing, like boom, that's it. And there's no there's no studio wizardry or any sort of anything to it. It's just as live as it could possibly get, and just using that drum machine more to, I guess, keep sense of rhythm in a way. And of course, it developed because of the way I was working. Unbeknownst to me, I was creating like an aesthetic. I was creating something with it, and I think like had I probably thought about the proper way of doing anything in terms of like signal flow, in terms of like separation of tracks, in terms of like all the things that you learn to do in a studio later on, probably wouldn't have made the record to begin with, because I would have been bogged down by all the technical stuff, and I would have completely lost that feeling and that emotional aspect of it that I was capturing as I was making it. So I think that is a very good example of how I tend to work, and why my music sounds the way it does. It's not like I'm trying to make anything that sounds like X, Y, or Z. Is that what I'm making with the process that I'm doing, with the tools that I'm using, and the way I'm using them? That's the result. There's no other explanation to it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Well, if it worked for you and you're happy with the result and you work within your means and stuff like that, and that makes you happy, and that's fine. I mean, that's your way of life, and you gotta, make sure that whatever you do, it makes you happy, right? And not never compare. Other people may have used multi-track or have better equipment of this or that, and
Yeah, like I mean,
it's
there's something to it. Of course,
yeah,
I have a full-fledged mastering studio nowadays, and I really learned the
yeah,
craft, and
yeah,
I have hours and hours of learning how to do things, and be uh, quite okay at it. But I think for me, I haven't lost sight of that, of having like put in the aesthetic, the vibe, the feel. To me, is infinitely more important than the technical components of it. So like I always tell people when I'm working in the studio, like I rather have, take a vocalist for example, I'd rather have a really great vocal take that was recorded shittily than a bad vocal take recorded with the best gear in the world.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely,
Because you
yeah,
can work with a good vocal take, and you can make it work. You can work around it. You can do so many things. You
yeah,
can't work, and there's no studio magic to fix a
that's
poor
right,
performance.
yeah,
And that to me, it's really really important. And I think like um, coming from being older, I think, and not having access to that undo button. You know what I'm talking
yeah,
about?
yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah,
Command Z, you
yeah,
can
yeah,
Command Z whatever and do it
yeah.
again and keep doing it
Oh,
until I think that has infinitely made music worse, actually. Like in the old days, and I'm talking like the golden era of music, when you talk about music that was made in pre-digital times, and by pre-digital I mean pre-Pro Tools time.
yeah, yeah,
Um, musicians, before they set foot in a studio, they were well rehearsed. They had practiced their songs start to finish. They knew how to play them live. They were very good at performing them live, and that was some, even like the most, with some exceptions, even the most rudimentary punk bands, even they were playing three chords and they were playing the rhythm, they were very tight at what they were doing as a band. They were tight. They knew their
yeah,
part. They could play from start to finish. Now, as we have this new technology where we can command Z anything, um, that has made us all worse performers in a way, because then, we can play something and yeah, it's not quite right. You didn't really learn it that great to do it. You haven't rehearsed it enough, but you still record it. It's not a good take. Do it again. Do another one. Do 80 takes, and then do a comp of all the 80 takes and cobble something together. And when you get used to doing that, then you stop playing your instruments, whether you're playing guitar, bass, drums, whatever it may be, singing, whatever it may be. You stop doing that. You stop the process of performing, of doing one song from start to finish, and it's a performance. You're capturing a feel, you're capturing something, right? And I think a lot of that got lost. So because of the way I'm working, when it comes to the recording process, at least at the time, and I still do to a lot of extent. I do a lot of live playing in the studio, like improvising and like just playing things and doing them by feel more than by what's whatever X, Y, and Z technical portion of it. Doesn't mean that I don't know my theory. It doesn't mean that I don't know the neck of the guitar, like the palm of my hand. That's not it. It's more about not being so cerebral about it and more focusing on the feeling part of it and the vibe and what a motif or a set of chords played in a certain order, in a certain way, what they make you feel at the time, versus like, oh, if I play X minor chord with an at 9, it gives you this sad, melancholic feel. It's a big difference between thinking about it in those terms versus just playing something.
Gotcha. A beautiful background. I mean, you have with the studio. How difficult was to put the studio together, and then how did you learn how to, at the beginning, record properly, and then set up instrument in such a way, and using Pro Tools? What's the process somebody goes through to become,
That's an ongoing process. That's
a good record engineer yourself?
That's an ongoing process. Like every day, I learn something new. Like every single day, I'm constantly curious about techniques. I'm constantly curious about equipment. I'm constantly curious about just in general, like at least in what I do, which I mostly do mastering, and that's the final stage of the recording process, right? And I'm constantly trying new things and constantly trying. I don't have a set way of doing anything, and I think that's an important thing to not think, oh, I've done all this work, I have thousands of credits to my name, I'm set. No, like you're not set. You got to keep on learning. You got to keep developing. Because there's always some new thing to learn, and I think this is really important. But to go back to your question, like I started doing what everyone else that you read about has done, which is internet at a studio, like booking time in the studio, like just doing with this kind of work. You can read all the theoretical that you want, and I've read tons of books about it and spent time studying on my own and reading, and you can read all you want about it, but it's just not the same as just being there and like taking a piece of equipment and well, turn it in and see what it does. And oh, okay, this does this. And if you take a microphone and you put it in front of an amp and you put it here, it sounds this way. And if you put it here, it sounds in a different way, and so on and so forth. And if I use this mic, it captures this kind of sound. And if I use this other mic, it sounds completely different, though it's the same amp. And you kind of, I think that's the best way to learn the craft, is by spending time in the studio. It's like I always compare audio engineering, whether you're a recording engineer or a mixing engineer or master engineer. I mean, these days, like, it seems like everyone's wearing multiple hats because of the nature of the business and whatnot. But um, I always find it keen to flying an aircraft. It's all about how many hours you've put into it, like doing the craft day in and day out, right? Like you could be like extremely knowledgeable, like you can know um, all about gain structure, like proper gain structure. You can learn all about, the different types of EQs that you can use for whatever situation. But if you don't do it every day, and if you don't apply that every day, and you practice every day, then it's like everything else. It's like any other muscle. It just atrophies, right? And it's very important to continue doing this and doing that. Like, I think, like, in general, like, I remember when I first started doing mastering work, it kind of followed a very similar path to my own music making endeavors. So, for example, I remember being interested in the craft after I went to a workshop, like a mastering class, like kind of workshop that Stefan Betke, an engineer from Berlin, also an artist as well, did back almost 20 years ago in
Wow.
2006. And I remember going to his lecture workshop and being fascinated by it. Like, oh, this sounds incredibly interesting to me. Like, that, what a cool thing, you know. And I remember going back home and wanting to learn more about it. And so I started to buy a bunch of books, like you will do back in the day to try to learn something. And I remember reading Bob Katz's book, and there was a lot of information. I thought, oh, this is all really cool. And then I started to practice, and, like, more importantly, more than actually doing any sort of, techniques or anything like that, just start to practice the art of listening, which is incredibly important, because
Absolutely.
ultimately making music as is like listening is as important as having something to say. And so I started to do a lot of that, a lot of listening, and listening to a lot of records, listening to, like, why this record sounds this way, why this record sounds in a different way, and just doing a lot of ear training in the beginning. And I think I spent probably a good 4 years where all I did was study, learn, and practice on my own. And then, of course, I did some internet in studios and whatnot. But that was the key part of it. And I think the only reason that I started, quote unquote, mastering per se was because artist friends that were working on something, that were like, oh, can you master my songs? I wanna shop this demo around. So can you help me with it? Because I know you're pretty, you're kind of like a little bit of an audio geek, so I know that you can help me with this. And that's kind of how I started. Like, a friend will bring me something, and I'll polish it and kind of make it sound, quote unquote, competitive. That, I hate that word. I hate competition, but that's just the word I use for that. But in any case, and that's how I started. And I started to do that, and then word of mouth kind of thing, where people say, oh, who did the, oh yeah, you should ask Raf to help you. Like, he was pretty useful, and made my thing sound pretty good. And kind of, that's how I started, and eventually, after a while, I realized, well, I guess that I should probably have a better setup because people are asking me to do this more and more. So perhaps I should have a better setup. So I started to build in my house in Seattle. I started to build like a professional setup, well, quote unquote professional setup, like what's a professional setup? This is such a stupid word, like every time I see like, oh, these are professional cables or these are professional equipment, it's like, what the fuck does that mean? Like what the
I know what
hell?
you mean. I know
You
what you
know,
mean.
like, so if X professional person uses it, doesn't that make the gear professional by definition?
Sure.
Like, regardless of what it is, right? Anyway, but so I started to build a more proper setup in my house, and then I had more able to work more efficiently, essentially, and then more people started requesting me, and then labels started to request me as well, like indie labels and whatnot, and then it just started to develop like that. It was very organic. It was not like I woke up one day and I thought, oh, I'm gonna be whatever. It was more like, okay, I just kind of fell into it because people are asking me, and I'm a kind of I've always had this philosophy that when you're asked to do something and someone is interested in your work, well, you should consider it and give it a time. And I'm always like willing to do things, to because I always learn something from it, and so I'll be like, oh yeah, sure, I can do it, and I'm kind of with that mentality, I always find the time to do things, and that kind of, I started extremely simple, you know, one compressor, one EQ, like, one sound card to sing things and get out of the box to put it to some analog gear just to give it some character and tone, and very simple, like nothing fancy. I mean, certainly not like how it's going at this point, yeah, and but always not losing sight of that initial, like, why am I doing it? Like it's okay, I'm doing it because I want to help out my friend, and they're asking me to do it, and oh, I mean, they're throwing me a couple $100 for this thing. Great, fantastic, but it was not my intent to be like a full-time um, engineer at all. That was
Yeah.
not like, you know. And then eventually, as more and more people and artists and labels and whatnot start to request me to do it, and I start to build it more, then it started to take a lot of time, because of course if I'm doing that, I'm not working on my own music either. That they have so many hours, right? So and then I started to try to find a balance between doing that kind of work and having that quote unquote like daytime job, and also balancing with my own wishes to continue making and releasing music,
Sure.
and
So, yeah.
and also, well, playing shows as well and touring and like doing all those things, because obviously that all takes time, and if I'm away playing shows somewhere, then I'm not in the studio, and of
That's
course
right. Yeah.
it's always been, for the last 15 years, it's been a balancing act of trying to um, be open to work, obviously, and being able to work, and clearly I've done very okay for myself, but at the same time, I also enjoy having the time to work on my own music and be creative and be able to work through my own thing through music, like I've always done. I've always viewed music as some sort of form of therapy for my own psyche in a way, and having that time, that quiet time to do it, it's really, really important to me as well. And mostly the creative outlet as well, because like the kind of work that I do, like mostly mastering work, well, there are a lot of moments that can be creative. It's predominantly a technical occupation, so it's not like I'm, spending 4 hours on an effect unit trying to make cool noises out of it. It's a complete different kind of work. So, and if it was up to me, in a perfect world, I'll probably just sit with an effect unit and spend hours just toying with it, making weird noises with it.
Sure.
I'd
No,
be
I
totally
know.
happy as well.
Sure. No, I know exactly. You are very humble in everything you say, and with your engineering work, with credit to, critical acclaim artists, and I will mention like three. What recollection do you have of, Terry Riley, for example? That's somebody who I admire.
I absolutely love his music, and it was I did this remasters for uh, two records that are, to me, they're absolutely incredible, and that was something really interesting because I thought, how do you remaster something that's a masterpiece already?
That's right.
you know so it's
Exactly.
a bit of like,
Exactly.
okay.
Exactly.
And but yeah, like that was a very, very, I feel quite privileged to have been able to do that. And I actually didn't meet Terry Riley because I was more like a hired gun doing like mastering work, but
Yeah.
still, like, I treat every project that I work on, I treat it as if it was my own music. Like this is very important to me to that what I'm working on, one, is something that I enjoy. That's very important to me, like super important to me. But also because I want to put as much effort as I put into my own work. And if you've seen the way that I work on my own music, sometimes the process can be incredibly long and with absolutely no rush whatsoever. Like I released in 2024, I released 3 albums for different projects. Two of those albums, one of them probably took me like 8 years to make.
Wow.
And the second one, it took like a good 6 years to do it. And that's how I work sometimes. It gets done when it gets done, and I put a lot of effort into it. And that is incredibly important to me, that anything that I'm working on, I'm giving it that level of attention, of that care. So yeah, when you're tasked to do something like, work on something by like Terry Riley or like, any other great artist, musician like that, then yeah, I'm giving it, I'm not just giving it my 100%, I'm giving it my 300%, my
Exactly. Yeah.
1,000%,
Yeah. Yeah.
just
Yeah.
because like, there's this like realization from when you've listened to a record before you knew you were going to work on it, and how that made you feel, and the impact it had on you at the time, and then years later you're working on it, then you go back to that and think like, man, if I was going to listen to this record as a first time listen and be my mind blown away like it did when I first listened to it, what will I do to make that and put yourself into the mindset? And yeah, and it can be quite a lot of pressure, because obviously, like I said earlier, how do you make a masterpiece any better, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's yeah, it was quite special, I will say.
Good for you. Good for you. Ryuichi Sakamoto, the second one.
Oh, I mean, what can I say about the master? You know, like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
maestro. You know, it's such a sad thing that he left so early. You know,
Absolutely.
um,
Yeah.
he was an absolute genius, and also an incredibly kind person, I will say. Really, really kind. And yeah, it was an absolute privilege working on a record um, uh, that I did the recording for and the engineering for, and that was really special to be able to work with him for a few days, like, you know, close and whatnot. That was really special. So very privileged for sure.
Good for you. And the last band that I will mention, Mono, with Rowan Guthrie and Giovanni Marais and all those people.
Oh, you're thinking of European mono, like the mono
Oh, yeah,
I
yeah.
work with is
The Mono.
Japanese mono,
Oh, I
which
see.
is
I see.
which
I
is the
was
band
thinking about
that
the Mono in the
no,
London.
this is you're talking about mono, the London trip hop group from the 1990s, like.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
like no, mono, and mono to me, like um Japanese mono, which is to me is like mono the band. They're like a legendary post-rock band. They're kind of like, you know, like back in the day, like if you think of the 1980s, right, when metal was a really big thing internationally, meaning in the mainstream, you had the four big names of metal, which were Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, and Anthrax, right? They were like the four big bands. And when I think of like post rock and all of its offshoots, you know, I always think of like the big four. What are the big four of post rock? And I always think of like Godspeed or Black Emperor, Mogwai,
Yeah.
Explosion in the Sky, and obviously Mono, the Japanese band.
The Japanese one. Yeah.
They're
I got.
they're they're like absolutely brilliant. They've been a band that I've been a massive fan of for a really long time. We're talking at least 25 years.
Yeah.
And I actually got to meet them for the first time. I've been working with them for about 3.5 years now, but I've never actually met them in person.
Yeah. Wow.
And yeah, because we've never been able to coincide. And last year, in was it in December? Yeah, December. They were playing in New York. They were doing this really special concert with like a full string orchestra. It was a really beautiful concert. And so I went to the show, which was in Brooklyn, and I finally got to meet them, like officially, like, oh, okay, I'm meeting Taka and like the rest of the band, because I've never met them before. And then I was thinking about it really carefully, and then I realized that all the way back, like basically like 20 years ago or so, I went to a mono show when they did one of their very early American tours. And I think this might have been like 2003, 2004, maybe. Details are a bit blurry, but I remember going to the show and my mind being completely blown. Like they were so loud and so powerful live. It was incredible. And I remember going after the show, I went to the merch table At the time, Tamaki was the one selling, like, she was the bass player from the band, and she was the one selling the the LPs and the shirts and all that stuff, after the show.
Sure.
And I remember I bought some records from her. I bought all these records from her and a T-shirt.
Yeah.
And so I kind of met her very briefly that at that show, and I was thinking about that, and I remember when I was meeting them here in New York, last year in December and whatnot, after the for the show and whatnot. I remember, like, I told Tamaki, like, I met you almost 20 years ago. I bought some records from you and a T-shirt back when I was a punter looking at the gig. And that was very full circle to, like, be
Yeah.
meeting the band that you've been working for quite a bit now, and
Yeah.
you've never actually met them in person, and say, oh yeah,
Yeah.
actually, I kind of met one of you guys, like, back when, just seeing the show.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know exactly
Yeah.
what you mean. I have had the opportunity to interview a lot of folks, and folks that I never thought that. See, like the radios and the YouTube channel for me began like an accident during the pandemic, right?
Mm.
I began working from home, and I was working so many hours and doing a lot of complicated stuff that maybe I
Mm.
wasn't happy, or I was happy doing it, but I was rushing, rushing, rushing. And during the pandemic, I thought, well, I need to stop my life. I'm not doing all the stuff that I'm doing. Half the stuff I like it, some stuff I don't like it, but
Mm.
I'm doing it because I wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I thought, well, I will open, a radio and as a way to listen to my music and the YouTube channel, and I thought, well, if probably 10 people get back to me, that would be great, and I keep on going. That was almost 3 years ago,
Yeah.
it, and uh, and going full circle, right? I bought record when I was 16 years old, right? From the Genesis and the Peter Gabriel of this world and the Tangerine Dream of this world and Pat Metheny or whatever. I remember those were the first four that I bought when I was 15, 16 years old. And now I have met them, I have talked to them, I have interviewed them, and it's I know exactly what you're saying. When you bought the records and the T-shirt from Mono, and then eventually
Yeah.
get working with
Yeah.
them and meeting.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely. It's
great.
very full circle for sure. It's very it's one of those things where you're kind of like you will have never guessed in a million years, that you'll be you know meeting some of these people that
You admire, right? So
well, you admire, but also that you've seen play, like,
yeah,
live and whatnot. And when there's this in, there's this invisible barrier, I call the invisible barrier, that you have between a performer and the audience. And
yeah,
usually when you're on the audience side, you're not one of them. There's
sure,
this, like, invisible line of, like, oh,
sure.
you don't want to bother the artist, or you don't want to, ultimately everyone is just people, right? That
That's right.
they're
Yeah,
all the same, right? We're all the
yeah,
same. But there's this kind of, especially when you're younger, there's this kind of, like, little bit of a combination of, like, a little bit of awe, a little bit of admiration, and a little bit of also being like, "Ooh, I don't want to intrude. I don't want to, and I think, like, it's an interesting thing when, like, years later, then you're like, oh, this is cool. Like, I got to work on this record, and it's not something that you had pursued. Like, it's not like you were chasing after a band or an artist or whatever to work with them. It just happened organically. It's a very special thing when that happens, because it's not something that you plan, and it's not something that, like, it just kind of happens. And it's a really fascinating thing about life in general, how it all, you know works in a way, and
yeah,
how truly small and interconnected the world is, like, when you think about it really hard, particularly nowadays. And
yeah.
I could go down the list of different artists that I've admired for a very long time, and I've got to work with them in some capacity, and it is always really special, and uh, I'm always in awe. Like I'm kind of like a little kid in a way still. Like, like I'm like, oh, I can't believe I'm doing this. Like how lucky.
Yeah,
Like
sure.
it's very special. Like I haven't. It's very easy to it's very easy, particularly in such a competitive field, and in an industry where everyone seems to be incredibly disposable. It's very easy to become extremely jaded and like kind of bitter and kind of unexcitable about anything, and you see that a lot. I think I find that really interesting. When you see a lot in New York, actually, you see a lot of people that've been around for a very long time, and they're all like kind of like their sense of awe has faded with the years, and I think whether I do it consciously or not, I feel that I'm still starstruck when I meet a lot of people, and I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of really cool people, and I'm kind of like a lot of times I still suffer, and again I'm almost nearly 50. I still suffer from imposter syndrome.
Yeah,
So I'm
I
kind
know
of
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. So I'm kind of
yeah,
like, wait, I'm doing what again? Why am I what? Like what?
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
still a thing. Like I remember very recently, like a few months ago, I was playing with my music partner Abu Mogard. We were playing at the Legacy Who Festival in Utrecht in the Netherlands, and I remember we were playing this beautiful church, and we did our show, and it was kind of like a really rough thing to do because um, when we had to do our sound check and all these things, that like things it was a very stressful day. Like we were trying to get things done fairly quickly just to get because the show needed to go on, and whatnot, and the schedule was very tight, and it was kind of like a super stressful. um I mean, it's always stressful when you're setting up and you arrive from another town and you're trying to, you're trying to get your your thing together. But in this particular case, like we don't play together often. Like, before playing in Utrecht, we had played together previously when we played in Rome in the summer. So it's been like at the very least like 4 or 5, even 6 months, if I'm doing my math right, that we had actually been in the same room, like playing music together. And so my thinking when I'm doing the show, I'm like dead focused on what I'm actually doing, and like trying to remember what I had played at the last show that we did, and we improvise a lot. So the set is very fluid. We play for
Right.
about 50 minutes and it's all very open, and and I'm trying to remember, like, what I had rehearsed in my studio. Oh, am I still gonna play this melody this way? Do I play with the bow? Am I gonna play with a slide? Just going through. I'm like zone focus. I'm not looking at anything and whatnot. And this is the part with the imposter syndrome section comes in, which is like I remember we were playing the show and I thought like I'm like sweating bullets. Like it's like I'm playing and I'm trying to like do my best and trying to super focus and concentrate on what I'm doing. And I remember the we played the last piece. The show's over. People were uh, clapping and whatnot, and it was pretty loud in there. And I think for some reason, I look up, like I look to the front, because usually I'm kind of like I'm quite quite shy on stage. Like I'm not very outgoing at all, and I'm usually just minding my own business. I kind of like playing my thing, and I don't I don't really ever talk to the audience, or like I'm very very shy on stage. And I remember I greeted, we took a bow, and I greeted like Abu Mogard, and as I was leaving, I noticed people were standing up, and I thought, for a second, oh, everyone's just leaving to rush to the next show because it's a festival. They're going to the next thing, right? And I
Sure.
remember like the stage manager that was working, helping us with like, ushering in and out of the stage and whatnot. Like he was very nice and very kind, and he was like, "Oh, that was a beautiful concert. Like, wow, this is like one of the few standing ovations I've seen at the festival." And I was like, "Wait, did I hallucinated?" Was there like people stood up because I thought they were just leaving,
Oh, good for you, man. Yeah, I know exactly.
And it was one of those things where I'm like, I'm having like a hard time believing that that's what actually happened, like it was kind of like, well, no, I thought no, they were just leaving, right? Like there was like no one stood up like to, and it was really one of those moments where I'm like, oh yeah, it's hard to, yeah, and I remember listening back to the recording of it because we were going to we planned to like release it, which we did in January. And I remember listening to the recording because we were mixing the recording from the show, and I was like, okay, that show wasn't half as bad as I thought it was, actually. Like, when I listened back to the recording, I was playing and like listening to the set flow and everything, and I thought, actually, I'm pretty happy with this one. Like we should release it. Like it's actually not bad. Like I'm pretty pleased with it, and it was infinitely better than I thought it was when I was actually playing the music. I thought like when I was playing it, I was like, oh my God, like, okay, so this, I'm gonna do that, and I'm kind of like just, I don't know. I get into this like it's almost like an out of body experience where like you're there, but you're not really. It's almost like when you disassociate in a way,
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
and that's what So yeah, I mean, still like I'm playing in front of like I don't know like 700 people or whatever, and I'm like at a church, this sold out show, and I'm like, no, I still have imposter syndrome, like, what am I doing here? Like, is this for real? Like, what the hell, Like
Sure.
everything could be like, I always feel like everything could just be over, tomorrow or something, and that's that, and so I never ever have taken a single moment of what I do for granted. It's always been a thing where I'm, when I'm 100% giving it my best, like there are no, there are no sick days. There's no pension to be acquired at the end of it. There's no, what does like, I'm already getting into that age where I'm like, oh, what does retirement looks like for me? It's like, oh, I guess retirement is when I die,
That's right. Yeah.
you
No.
know?
And I know exactly what you mean. I have the same feeling with interviewing people and then meeting them face
Yeah.
to face. Doing this via Zoom is kind of very safe, and
Mm.
I'm very shy in general. And then meeting, that lady or that musician or whatever. And I had been invited to the home in some cases. I Once I'm there, I think what I'm doing here. I mean, what have I done to deserve this?
Yeah.
And so I know exactly what you mean. I suppose that working hard, it opened doors. I mean, nothing is,
Absolutely. Yeah.
people are calling you, Raf, because you have done a lot of work, like Terror Riley, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah,
Sakamoto or this or that, So,
yeah, for sure. I mean,
you
I
earn
mean,
it. You earn it,
yeah. I mean,
So that,
I haven't lost sight of that, but it's always
yeah,
it's still like it can, I remember very clearly actually the first time I visited Ryuichi's studio in Manhattan,
yeah,
and I
wow,
remember being there like in the studio and just walking past, instruments and things like that and thinking like, can't believe I'm here. Like, it's like
yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's such a like mind-blowing thing, and yeah, like it's one of those things where, yeah, very privileged, I will say, like for,
yeah,
to be able to do the thing that I love for work. Like, it doesn't feel like work most of the time because, I really enjoy it. Of course, it is hard work, and sometimes I'm here in this room, 14, 16 hours a day working, and that's, I love what I do, and I wouldn't change it for anything. But yeah, it's a very hard existence because you're balancing, what you do for work with your life, with your creative life, with every other thing, and it can be very challenging as well, and there's a lot of things that go into it that are not necessarily music related.
yeah. I know what you mean. You have played in a lot of sort of I don't know, non-traditional spaces
Mhm.
like churches, synagogues you
Yeah.
see around the world, man. Good for you. I'm so used to go to a concert hall or a particular venue or a jazz club or whatever. And but you you know you have done it very, as I said before, very very non-traditional places, if you will. So
Yeah, I like that aspect of it. I like to perform in spaces with significant historical importance as well. It
yeah,
always adds a lot of weight to the music that I'm making and how I react to the space as well. That the I've played in some very unique places actually. I remember like a very long time ago playing at a former leper colony in Italy.
ah,
Yeah, there's a leprosarium in Ancona in Italy, and I played at this place, and it was really uh like, whoa, like pretty heavy in a way. I played in Poland. I played in Wrocław, a town in the west side of Poland. I played in at the White Stork Synagogue, which is one of the very few synagogues that survived the Holocaust.
got you. Wow, wow.
Yeah, and it was also pretty special to play there. It was very very heavy. So, and I've played a lot of really nice churches, um, really really old churches in Europe, and I think we don't have that kind of thing in the U.S. Because the U.S. is so new. We don't have really really ancient places. Like last summer, Abu Mugar and I were playing in Rome, right by the aqueduct. Like it's what, 2,000 years old.
1,000 years. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and same in other places. I was in Greece last year as well in September, and I was playing in Chania, which is an island in of as part of Greece, and I was playing in a Venetian castle, like, and also very very old, like I think it was like 1300s, maybe 1400s or something like that. And yeah, it's an interesting thing when playing at these kind of spaces that are not necessarily designed for music, but then you adapt to it and you make it work for music. And sometimes you get like incredible acoustics, like at the space that you're not expecting at all. Like at this Venetian I guess it's a bastion or fortress, small fortress, because of the way the walls were set up and the ways that the speakers were placed in the space. If you were standing in a certain section of the room, the sand will bounce back from the back wall, the stone walls, and it felt like completely immersive, like if you were listening to like spatial audio in a way, you know. And because of that bounce back, you could really hear, depending on where you're standing, it will be like, whoa, this is really cool. Like, it's a very cool experience. I wish I could be listening to what I'm performing from the audience perspective. I should have played in the
Totally.
middle
Yeah.
of the I should have played in the middle of the room, really, because it was quite nice. And same other spaces as well. Like I tend to when I'm performing live, I tend to um, always record local things, like from the town that I'm performing at. So, for example, I'll spend, arrive the night before a show, and then the next day during the day, I'll be walking around the town and just kind of field recording and kind of getting familiar with the place in a way, and then use a lot of those recordings. I'll use them in the performance later that night, and I'll incorporate them into it. So like, um, almost like making something with the immediate surroundings of the people that are going to see the concert. And I'll be processing the recordings with my, different effects, and I'll be doing loops and whatnot, and starting to create like this collages with the sounds, and then it starts to sound in a way that is completely foreign and alien when you listen to it. It's hard to contextualize because the context has been completely taken away, but at the same time, it sounds familiar. Like, for example, I was playing in Galicia in Santiago de Compostela a few years ago, and I remember um, walking past like a bar, and there were people playing traditional Galician music. And if you're familiar with the music from Galicia, there's a
A
lot
little
of
bit.
yeah. So there's a lot of bagpipes and a lot of things that are very Celtic. Very big Celtic influence in
Yeah.
the region. So I recorded a lot of folk music that was being performed by just the local people, like local musicians, local people singing and playing bagpipes and percussion instruments together at this place. And I recorded some of it, and I was with my friend, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna record a little bit here. And when I went back to the hotel, and then I started to work on what I recorded, and then I ended up using it for the performance
Wow.
at this theater that I was playing. And I remember I started, playing field recordings and whatnot, and then the sound of this bagpipes from the bar that I had recorded the night before. I start to play them and start to process them, and there's like a bit of like a very traditional folk melody being played, and I start to process it, and then it becomes this long drone, sustained drone through the processing, right? To start my first piece. And I remember after the show, like a lot of people were like, I think I was hallucinating or tripping, because like I could swear I started to hear bagpipes during the set. And I was like, yeah, I recorded them here. Like, and so people could feel the familiarity of their local culture and local surrounding being presented in a completely different context, and kind of imagining that they recognize the instrument or the sound that they're listening to. It could be anything, really. It doesn't really need to be like a specific instrument, but it's a nice thing to be able to connect with the audience in this fashion. Same in when I was in Mexico City. Um, last October, I was in Mexico City. I was playing at Mutec and at the Mutec Festival, and I did this piece, and I spent some time. I was gonna perform at the Chapultepec, and if you've been to Mexico City, like you're familiar with Chapultepec Park, and so I spent some time at Chapultepec during the day, just going around and recording around the park. And there's like so much stuff going on at that park, right? Like there's like vendors and there's people and there's always something. There's performances, like from different performing troops and whatnot. And I did a lot of recordings for that. And I used it at the concert. I used it, at the Casa del Lago, which is where I was performing. At the amphitheater that they have there, and I will be playing back the sounds of the Chapultepec forest back to the forest. It's really nice.
Absolutely, and people go crazy with stuff when you use local music, to as well, something that you record during the day and then you can incorporate it, some hours later during the gig. Le Guess Who, that's I was listening to that album last night, and man, that's very, very good, man.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was the set. Like I was like, oh yeah. I guess it sounded better like when I heard it back recorded. I thought, when I was when I was performing that show, I thought, oh man, this is so stressful. Like I feel so inadequate. But when I heard it back, I thought, oh, this is actually not bad. Like I like it a lot. Let's release it. So
you guys try to record everything, or
we are, yeah. Like
yes,
are recording we're recording every set, and because like I think the nature of what we do is so improvisational that it's good to document it. I feel like I was telling Guido, that's his real name. He's an Italian artist, and I was telling him like I feel like our music is a bit like it's very 1970s, like almost like I feel like if you think about like 1970s artists like Tangerine Dream, for example, like they used to do these concerts and they were very improvised, like they were that's the whole thing, right? They're improvising in their synthesizers and whatnot, and I remember they recorded some of those concerts and they released them as a live album as well, and but I think like in the way that we're working, because it's so improvised and we're making things on the fly, I think it's really nice to have, because we have like a basic set structure that we have, right? And we've created like a quote unquote like a blueprint of it, right? So we have, okay, so at this point in the set, I'm doing this, and then at this point, this comes in and whatnot. So we have a bit of a structure and we know the pieces that we're going to play. But the way that we play them changes. And it changes for a number of reasons. It changes because perhaps I'm playing the melody that is supposed to go here in a bow. And instead of playing with the bow, I ended up playing with the slide, or I ended up doing something different. And sometimes I may end up, reversing the notes or changing something around, or I don't know, it just could be anything. And the nice thing about recording all of it is that now we've played several shows now, like together, and now we have the same pieces but perform entirely different. It feels like if you're able to, it's like Rashomon effect essentially. Like you're seeing different viewpoints from the same material, and if you can put them back to back and A/B them, so say, then you start noticing the differences. They're really marked. You'll be like, oh wow, in this one this thing happened, and in this one this other thing happened, and it starts to, I find it really fun to do. Like I really love performing live with Abu Mogard. It's like one of the most fun that I have, even though it's very stressful to do it, because of course I want to give it my best, and I'm really always very worried about what I'm going to play, and more importantly, can I remember what I did at the previous show? And like, so I'm constantly worried about, but at the same time, I find it incredibly gratifying to do it and to um, just do different things. Like one of the last show we played, actually, like we played in Poland, and I remember we were traveling from Norway. We were going from Norway to Poland, and at one point we were on one of the flights. There was this really nice drone happening on the plane, like really nice drone. It was a really beautiful sound. It was fantastic, actually. And we were listening to that, and Guido said, like, I'm gonna record this, and like he started to record this drone, and like we ended up he went back to we got to the hotel. He spent some time at the hotel, and he ended up working that drone into one of the pieces that we played that night.
Wow.
And it really made the piece so much better by adding this like drone to it, like that. I thought, wow, I really love this version that we play. Like the audience really enjoyed the concert. We also broke some stuff at the concert because of bass frequencies and whatnot. Like we broke a lamp at the venue, which unfortunately it happens sometimes with the vibrations, But in any case, like I really enjoyed how it came out. And I thought, when we finally do like a proper studio version of this piece, because we never actually recorded it other than when we recorded live, I really want to use this drone that you found that on the flight, because it really adds a lot to the piece. I really love how random, what a random moment that on the flight that you're taken to get to play this show. It just happened that there's a really nice sounding drone that fits perfectly with the track. It's that you only have to like slightly pitch it to fit the intonation of the piece, but it's
The piece
very
you're playing that, right?
but it was
Absolutely.
very close in pitch, so it wasn't like a massive switch, and what a coincidence that it works, and it was a really nice experience too. And I think that those moments to me are incredibly fun and incredibly special as well, because what are the odds, like what's that all happens and that it all comes together like that, and yeah, so I really enjoy those concerts, and we're playing again um next month. We're playing in Prague and we're playing in Berlin, and I really look forward to it because it's going to also be entirely different from the shows that we've presented at Legacy Who, or in Madrid when we played the first time together, or in Rome, or it's really special. Like I really love working um, with Guido, with Abul Mogard. Like it's kind of like really fascinating how that came together and how much we clicked in terms of like musically. Like we're able to do this set, like the one you heard from Legacy Who, and like make that basically on the fly
Wow.
and make it work,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
it's mostly because we found out like later on that we've been working together for about 2 years now, and we found out that we have very similar ways of working in the studio, like because we have, even though we grew up in entirely different places, Guido grew up in Italy, 1970s Italy, with its own, set of um, conditions, in the 70s and 80s in Italy. It was a very rough time in Italy, if you remember the news. And even as such, like we've connected in so many different ways. I mean, of course, um, culturally, our cultures are, me coming from a Spanish culture and coming from Italian culture, and I think like we work in very similar ways. And in fact, like I like to use the analogy of language to describe the relationship between his music and my music, like his solo work and my solo work. It's kind of like Spanish and Italian. It's like related, it's close enough, but they're not the same thing. They're very different, actually.
So, yeah,
And if
I
you,
know exactly. I know exactly.
if you speak both languages, then you know how different they are. You know that, and
That's right. Yeah.
the intricacies of it. You know of things, and I think that's a very good way to explain like our entire collaboration. You know, and it's absolutely, it's one of the, it's been really nice to be able to do it and to continue to perform and to release music. And I really hope that we can record more music together. Last time I was in Italy, when we were doing the Rome concert, I came to his town in near Rome, and we were in the studio for about 2 days, like rehearsing, and the rehearsal mostly consisted of us improvising in the studio. Like, and I remember we recorded everything. So we recorded like probably like a good 6 or 8 hours worth of material of just improvising in the studio, playing and improvising in the studio. So we probably have a lot of material to make a record out of it, you know, and then continue adding to it and working the way we work. But yeah, it was a really nice experience, and I think I generally really appreciate like Guido's like outlook in life and the way that he works and the way that he does things, and he built his own gear a lot of times, and it's really fascinating, you know, that he can do that and build like, oh, I just made, like, I remember being the students like, oh yeah, I just made this like 1073 like clone, like I found the blueprint for it, like the schematics, and I just followed it and assembled it together. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. Like, I'm so impressed right now. Like, holy
That's
shit.
right. That's right.
You know?
Yes, I think
And
people are like that.
and very special person, and yeah, like it's very great, you know, and we get along wonderfully. I like, sometimes I, like, we joke, I'm like, yeah, it's like you're like a brother from another mother kind of thing situation, you know, because it's,
Sure.
you know,
Sure.
we get along so well and work together so well. So anyway.
Yeah. Let me record it. All right. I don't have that many questions left. So what was the inspiration behind Fasadism that was released in November 2024? You know, of course, that work came from Facade and has a lot of Jungian inspiration with, you know, like persona. We only put a facade in front of us when walking down the street, the way we behave, and so on and so forth. So what was the motivation for?
Well, that record was, it was a very long time in the making, because that record, I first got the idea for it. I was in Italy in 2016. I was in Milan, and I remember walking past an American style diner in Milan, which is just out of its own. I mean, it's its own thing, you know. It's like, what the hell, so out of place, right? Like they had this like, think of like American style, like 1950s style, like Americana kind of place, you know. I was walking past it, and the place was called Il Mito Americano, which in, you know, it's like a mistranslation. Basically, they wanted to call it the American Dream. That's what they meant to say, you know. But the way they translated it, it was more like the American myth, you know, if you translate literally, right?
Literally, yeah.
And you know, I'm not like, I know enough Italian to get around. And I remember seeing that, and I thought, oh, I kind of laughed when I saw the nation, because I thought, oh, that's funny. Like, they completely botched the translation of it, you know. Like, I guess, you know, And then for a second, I stopped and I thought, no, actually, that's a pretty good description of it. It's a myth. It's a Horatio Alger kind of like myth, the American dream. What is that? Like what the hell is that anyway? And it kind of like started this long process of ideas that started to develop in my head, like all the way back in 2016, and over the years, like I was working on this record, not consistently, but more in different sprints, I like to call, like I think a lot of times I like to, I think of music making more than running a marathon. It's more like doing little sprints, short bursts of creativity. And you have so many of those, so you kind of like you're a lot of times when you're creating, you may be at rest in a way, and then something happens and it just sparks something, and then you have a little burst and it's a sprint, and then you do a thing, and then that stops, and then you go back into um, hibernation, if you want to call it that. So over the years, I was working on this thing, and as years passed and different things happened in life and just in general, like the pandemic happened, lockdowns, at one point during lockdowns, I was reading a lot about architecture. I've always been fascinated by brutalist architecture. Like I find it very uh, beautiful and fascinating to me. And whenever I've been in different places, all over the world, whatnot, I always try to look for like cool looking two things that I really enjoy looking at. The brutalist architecture from the classics, that when you think of brutalist architecture, right? And I also like looking at old Soviet buildings. Like if you think of like old post-communist or during communist times, like in Eastern Europe, all the Soviet-made buildings, or Soviet-inspired buildings. Like some of them are like, their form of brutalist architecture is just absolutely incredible. Like it really blows my mind when I see some of these buildings. Like I remember seeing years ago, I went to Tbilisi, to Georgia, to perform in Tbilisi, in the country of Georgia, and I remember seeing this Bank of Georgia building, which used to be like an old government building, but eventually became the bank building. And it's it's like boxes stacked together. It looks incredible. Or like, the famous Czech TV tower in Prague, which when it was built, like people absolutely hated this atrocity. That was a symbol of like Soviet communism, and people really hated this building. But I think it looks incredible. Like I really love the architecture of it. And so I was really fascinated with that, and reading a lot about it. And at the same time, this is happening maybe out of just having, not much to do in my, off time, because I was, here pretty much the entire year, just not being able to go anywhere. I was reading about a lot of unrelated. I was reading a lot about different periods of Russian history.
Yeah.
And I was reading about Catherine the Great, and what Potemkin villages were, and this concept of entire villages that were erected to pretend that the Russian Empire was very successful at one point, and Gregory Potemkin, which is the person who designed these to impress Catherine the Great, like they were all like facades, just there was nothing there. And I thought that it was really interesting to me, and I started to make those correlations of facades and the what we put on forth to the world, particularly nowadays, and like in the era in present day, when you think of the way that we have created this perfectly curated avatars of our life on social media, like you see whatever social media company, doesn't really matter, but you see this perfectly curated lives that are in many cases completely fake or completely built for the audience,
That's right.
and and it truly is like a Potemkin kind of village situation in a way, because there's not much substance to it, and I think we are in the modern era, we're all guilty of that to some extent, where we're on, I don't know, whatever social media platform, and we've put out the image that we want others to see, right? We don't show like what reality looks like. And I was fascinated by all these concepts, like, and try to find a way to interlink them into what it's like to be living at the time that we're living on right now, and what it was like to be living in at the time in 2024 with the incoming like presidential elections, and what that meant, and what it means to have a complicated identity, like some of us do, as Americans, like um, it can get infinitely complicated. And I was putting these threads and putting them together, and I really thought this facetedness title was pretty apt for it, and I really also like the almost Freudian slip of the word facadisms, because it almost sounds like fascism.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
no, I
know,
know. Yeah, I know, and I know
it,
I completely agree with you
it,
comment about social media. We live in a complicated and fake world in many ways, man.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely, and was yeah, it is, it is it's all very infinitely complicated, and I think that yeah, those were the inspirations for it. And of course, working on it on and off over the years, the perspective and the focus tends to shift quite a little bit, where you
Yeah.
go from here, and sometimes, like, an idea that you develop for something, then it turns into something else, and it becomes this kind of onion in a way, that the more you start peeling back, the more layers you keep finding, and the more you keep making, and yeah, it was a very interesting process, a very interesting record to make. I think yeah, I don't know if I'll make another record like that again, mostly because circumstances, were so specific, and I think it takes a lot of commitment to start working on something, and over the years still go back to something, and see it through, and not
Yeah.
give up on it, or revisit. And, oh, I wonder. Let me listen to this again, and see, what it sounds like today. And I think having no specific time frame to do anything when it comes to your own creative process can be a blessing in a way, because then I feel that time is such a great vantage point of view to be able to listen to something you did. I remember the first sketch I did for this new album for Facadisms was the song called Forever Ago Is Now. And I remember I started to work on that. The chord progression, I had it done in 2017. Around the time I had been working on the Shameless Years. And it's a very kind of pop song progression, like in a very, it has one of those, what they're called like 1-5-6-3 kind of chord progression, or I think it's 1-5-6-4, perhaps one of those really poppy chord progression. And I think I have like another track of mine uh, from the Shameless Years uses a similar chord progression as well. And I think I inverted it for like the order, like I changed the order depending on where you start. A progression like that, it sounds in a certain way, and then when you put it in a different order, it sounds completely different. And it was something like that, and that's when I started to work on that piece. And over the years, you tweak here and there, but that was the first one I started for that record. And then some other ones I worked on in like 2020, and then other ones in like 2022, 2023. Over the years, it's just kind of like building and whatnot. And I think like, yeah, the combination of it, it's this record and putting it together. Yeah, it's a long time to put it together and to not lose sight of it, and continue and not give up and just keep doing it, and I think you know that's a very important thing, to just keep doing what you're doing and not give up.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a very good uh, value to have, having the motivation, and you have not given up. You have done very well. The last question for you. I know we've been talking for 2 hours now. We can buy your music, get a hold of you. I know that you mentioned you have actually three concerts coming up in March. So you're going to Prague, then Germany, and Germany March the 17th and 18th and the 20th. And where people can get a hold of you, where they can buy the music, and feel free to mention.
Yes. So to buy the music, the best place to buy it nowadays is Bandcamp. It's probably one of the very few places you can actually buy directly from the artist. Yeah, and nowadays, like I run my own label now for all my music, so it's very direct. Like everything comes directly. There's no middleman. There's no, and I've spent a lot of time setting this up, and so the vinyl, like the records are available on Bandcamp on vinyl. All the vinyl that I'm making for the record label that I release. It's all bio vinyl, and bio vinyl, for everyone who's not familiar with it, instead of using the petroleum for the record, what it uses is vegetable oil and other things that are recyclable or been recycled. And while it's not the most eco-friendly thing either, because making vinyl really pollutes a lot, it's a little step in the right direction, at least to get away from using petroleum based for the actual vinyl record. And it sounds pretty identical, like there's no sound quality degrading or anything like that, so it's very similar. So you can buy it all on the Bandcamp, irisarri.bandcamp.com, and or you can look up for Black Null editions on the internet, Instagram, whatever social media platforms. And you can also find me on all the streaming services, although I really appreciate when someone buys a record, because not only the mechanics of streaming are incredibly messed up in terms of like the revenue, in terms of the potential for revenue, but also there's like a nice special connection because I'm the one shipping someone a record, so I'm kind of like, it's kind of nice to sometimes, I've had people over the years that have been buying my music online on Bandcamp and whatnot, and I'll be shipping records. I've shipped all over the world, and sometimes I may be playing a show somewhere far away, and I meet the person that's been buying my records for the first time, and it's really nice to have that connection because oh yeah, someone will come and say, oh yeah, I bought your record, this record on Bandcamp years ago and whatnot. And I'm like, oh, what's your name? And they'll tell me their name. I'm like, oh, you're such and such from I don't know, Poland or Australia or whatever it may be, and it's always really fun and nice to have this kind of human component to it, that it's not all this faceless, algorithmic generated background mood content.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Rafael. And
hey, thank you so
nice
much
talking to
for
you. And then if you're ever in town in the DC area, I don't know why you want to come here, but with all the with all the mess here in DC, but if you're around town, feel free to, you're more than welcome to come to dinner here.
Thank you so much, I appreciate
Get together
it.
for coffee or whatever you want to do. Pues
Bueno,
very nice talking to
Claudio,
you.
muchísimas gracias,
Igual, pues nos vemos. Hasta luego.
un
Muchas
placer.
gracias.
Hasta
Igual,
luego.
chao.
Chao.